The room hums with the low, nervous buzz of anticipation, the kind you can almost taste. White fluorescent lights, papers rustling, aides muttering into phones. The cameras are already rolling, their red record lights blinking like judgmental eyes. No one breathes too deeply. Everyone knows something is about to happen, though no one dares guess who will start the fire. Then a voice, measured, steady, unmistakable, cuts through the noise. Jasmine Crockett leans into her microphone, her gaze locked straight ahead with the calm of a woman who's already done the math. $10 billion. The words drop like a gavel. A silence follows so crisp it could slice through marble. Someone shuffles papers just to fill the vacuum. That's how much America handed over, she continues, her tone firm but laced with disbelief, a teacher scolding the nation's conscience. The camera pans to Musk, expression motionless, almost sculptural, every muscle rehearsed in self-control. The air shifts. A narrator's voice overlays the scene, trembling with restrained anger, at a time when families are choosing between medicine and rent, when parents skip meals so their children don't have to, one man's empire thrives on taxpayer fuel. And tonight, America finds out how. Clips flash like lightning, grocery lines stretching around blocks, school teachers holding bake sales for supplies, headlines about record profits. The contrast lands like a punch. Viewers feel it in the gut, the grotesque imbalance between struggle and entitlement. Back in the room, the chairperson's pen stops mid-scribble. A reporter glances up, mouthing the number as though trying to believe it. 10 billion. The word billion echoes in the heavy air like a curse. Crockett doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't have to. Authority radiates from precision. And while America footed that bill, she says, the same communities that built this wealth were told to tighten their belts. She pauses, letting the statement sink into marble and conscience alike. A reaction shot, Musk adjusting his posture, lips tightening. That flicker of discomfort becomes the entire internet's latest meme fodder. Then, quiet again. The kind that hums before an earthquake. Because what she's about to say next won't just embarrass a billionaire, it will append an image millions believed untouchable. But what she revealed next didn't just stun the room, it rewrote the image of a tech savior millions had worshipped. The camera pulls back from the silent committee room and sweeps outward, to the restless country beyond. The narration lowers into a steady rhythm, half documentary, half heartbeat. Across America, factory gates creak shut before dawn. A mother in Ohio refreshes job listings while the coffee cools. Teachers in Texas tape up old textbooks, covering graffiti instead of buying replacements. The voice continues, this is the America no one with a launchpad dares to livestream, the America that funds ambition it will never touch. Cut to gleaming images of rockets streaking into cobalt skies, drones filming car plants the size of cities, investors applauding quarterly reports. A golden montage of progress financed by invisible hands, the taxpayers' hands. The narration doesn't scold, it mourns the swap between aspiration and exploitation. For every cheer of innovation, there's a sigh from the worker who helped pay for it. In Washington, the myth of the innovator is gospel. Elon Musk, archetype of genius, breaker of rules, self-made in capital letters. Even critics treat him like gravity, inescapable. Politicians line up for photo ops beside battery prototypes and reusable rockets, each handshake doubling as a transaction. What few discuss, what Jasmine Crockett has decided to drag into daylight, is the machinery humming beneath those headlines. Tax abatements written into state budgets, federal credits disguised as incentives, local governments bending zoning laws in the name of jobs tomorrow. Her staff had spent months tracing that machinery, moving through spreadsheets like archaeologists dusting bones. Line by line, they discovered that innovation had a price tag measured in billions, public funds quietly redirected into private ventures. No conspiracy. Just policy too boring for cameras until now. The narration gains momentum, the music swells beneath it. This isn't hatred of success, the voice insists. It's a question of ownership. Who built the runway for that rocket? Who paid for the roads leading to his factories? Who believed that trickle-down would one day reach their dinner tables? Crockett's office lights burned long after midnight, aides piecing together the puzzle by hand. Every chart, every grant, every local tax forgiveness circled in red. They weren't hunting scandal, they were proving a pattern. One that explained why Musk's empire could expand even when schools shrank and clinics closed. Cut to the digital sphere, pundits debating whether government partnerships fuel growth or favoritism. In the corner of the screen, a countdown clock ticks toward the hearing we've just witnessed. The tension is no longer financial, it's moral. When the day arrives, the congresswoman walks in wearing that now famous blue jacket. She doesn't plan to grandstand, she plans to translate complexity into clarity. You cannot fix what you refuse to name, she had told her chief of staff earlier that morning. The narration tightens like a drumline. Every number has a story. Every zero a human face. Viewers feel the quiet inevitability, justice about to materialize not as a gavel strike, but as a spreadsheet-turned weapon. Back in the committee chamber, aides exchange uneasy glances. They know she's only scratched the surface. There are contracts the public hasn't seen, clauses buried inside environmental rebates and space development grants. The kind of bureaucratic camouflage designed to bore watchdogs into silence. But not her. A pause. The soundtrack dies down, making room for the audience's anticipation. Then the voice returns, barely more than a whisper, and just when they thought they understood the scope of the revelation, the truth demanded a larger canvas. As the numbers spilled out, staffers looked up in disbelief, because the figure she dropped next would make 10 billion look small. He was the poster child of modern genius, the man who promised to take humanity to Mars, drive our cars with no hands, and free the digital town square from censorship. The news called him a visionary, his fans called him a prophet. To them, Elon Musk wasn't just rich or smart, he was inevitable. The narration lands in cinematic rhythm, matching the rising tempo of his legend. A kid from South Africa, a startup hustler in Silicon Valley, a gambler who turned code into cash. The images flicker across the imaginary screen, the scrappy web company sold to bigger sharks, the early electric cars purring across desert highways, rockets lifting from Cape Canaveral against fiery skies. Each success layered myth over man until the myth swallowed him whole. He cultivated the aura of rebellion, the billionaire who mocked bureaucracy, the inventor too bold for caution tape. In interviews, he laughed off regulation as if it were an outdated superstition. No one changed the world by asking permission, he'd proclaim, gazing into camera lenses that adored him back. But behind the pyrotechnics, the narration softens, cuts deeper. The truth about revolutions is that someone always pays for the fireworks. Every empire has scaffolding, and Musk's was built from public timber. State governments eager to host his factories offered multi-million-dollar incentives, land grants, tax holidays, fast-track permits. Federal programs poured money into battery technology and electric vehicle rebates. NASA, once a fortress of public science, signed contracts worth billions to his private company for space transport. Each deal wrapped as progress, each subsidy justified as an investment in innovation. Yet behind those glowing headlines were the fingerprints of taxpayers whose names would never appear in press releases. The montage turns clinical, spreadsheets fade in, subsidies stacking like skyscrapers. A narrator's voice presses the paradox. The man who vowed to break free from the system had built a throne atop it. As his fortune soared, so did his influence. Politicians sought his approval, fans quoted his late-night posts like scripture. But the more power he amassed, the more his public persona fractured. The self-proclaimed free speech absolutist began suspending journalists online. The champion of making life multiplanetary ridiculed critics who questioned his labor practices on Earth. Visionary pioneer? Perhaps. Opportunistic capitalist? Undeniably. Cameras loved him because he made disruption look glamorous, a cowboy straddling galaxies while mortals argued about taxes. Yet that image came at a cost, the erasure of everyone who paved the road beneath his legend, engineers, factory workers, and the taxpayers underwriting his risks. The narration grows sharper. He transformed dependency into destiny, calling it partnership. He weaponized charisma into credibility, calling it transparency. And with every bold promise, the public mistook marketing for miracle. Montage, conference stages, roaring crowds, hashtags that crown him a folk hero. Every gesture, rolling eyes at regulators, deleting tweets mid-controversy, feeds the narrative of unfiltered brilliance. But hero worship has a half-life. Admiration curdles when repetition exposes pattern. Clips fade to moments of contradiction, pledges of open technology followed by patent lawsuits, boasts of revolutionary management alongside mass layoffs, oaths to stimulate middle-class manufacturing while relocating production to cut labor costs. The story begins to wobble under its own contradictions, like a star collapsing toward gravity. Then, the tonal shift, the quiet part of the montage. Nighttime footage, empty assembly lines lit by security lights, workers clocking out, parking lots stretching across forgotten farmland. The narrator whispers, in every fairy tale about greatness, there's a chorus of the unseen, the ones who pay admission for someone else's dream. Yet the myth holds fast. It's easier to worship a savior than audit a balance sheet. So the public claps on cue, governments sign fresh incentives, and Tesla stock soars again. The cycle endures because belief is profitable. Journalists chasing inconsistencies are labeled envious or naive. Economists who warn of dependency are ignored. Musk jokes about taxes on social media, and the crowd laughs, unaware that his humor costs them libraries, clinics, and clean water grants. The script renders it with bitter irony. He made audacity a currency, and America kept printing it for him. Still, power invites its mirror. For every self-styled messiah, there emerges someone unshaken by spectacle, someone who doesn't flinch at wealth or myth. The narration slows, letting the weight settle. He wasn't the first to crown himself a maverick, and he won't be the last. But even the brightest constellations can flicker when confronted by daylight. Images fade, rockets dissolving into pages of legislation, car factories merging with budget charts, his smiling portrait superimposed over rows of tax codes. And just as the myth feels untouchable, the voice sharpens to a point of intrigue and inevitability. But while the world was busy cheering his every tweet, one congresswoman from Texas began connecting the dots, and what she discovered would make even billionaires sweat. Long before the cameras found her in that committee room, long before a billion-dollar empire flinched at the sound of her voice, Jasmine Crockett had been fighting on sidewalks and in courtrooms that never made headlines. She didn't rise from privilege, she rose from purpose. The story opens far from Washington's marble staircases. Dallas, years ago, summer heat shimmering on asphalt. The courthouse buzzed, overworked public defenders balancing folders like battle shields. In one cramped office cluttered with coffee cups and case files, a young attorney sat across from a mother facing eviction. Her rent was 3 days late. Her landlord had already changed the locks. When Jasmine walked in, she didn't promise miracles, she promised to listen. That, it turned out, was her superpower. The narration slows with reverence. Before she fought billionaires, she fought hopelessness itself. One housing case, one unjust arrest, one frightened client at a time. Cut to montage, fluorescent hallways, court benches filled with tired faces, each victory hard-won and untelevised. She'd learned the law not as a ladder to climb, but a tool to carve open access, its handle made of paperwork, its blade of empathy. Friends recall how she'd bring hot food to her own clients waiting for verdicts. How she drove between hearings blasting gospel and hip-hop, Armor and Anthem in one playlist. Every case deepened her conviction. Justice only works when ordinary people can afford it. When protests filled the streets years later, voices demanding police reform, chanting for dignity, Jasmine wasn't behind a podium, she was in the crowd, megaphone shaking in her hands. Sweat on her forehead, fire in her tone. One viral clip captured her shouting over sirens, "If you're tired of shouting, start voting." It rocketed across timelines. Overnight she was dubbed the people's attorney, a lawyer who didn't just know the system but defied its cynicism. Her decision to run for office came from exhaustion as much as ambition. "I kept winning cases," she once said in an interview, "but losing neighborhoods." Courts could protect individuals, policy could protect generations. So she traded her courtroom for a campaign trail. Cinematic imagery pulses again, handshakes in barbershops, backyard debates, town hall lights dimming as she connects statistics to stories. Opponents underestimated her. Too fiery, too blunt, too rooted in real life to play Washington's chess properly. That underestimation became her armor. Election night, a cramped headquarters in South Dallas. Folding chairs, half-eaten pizza, volunteers refreshing results. When her victory flashed across the screen, no champagne, just a heavy exhale and a group hug so tight it blurred every camera lens. She'd won not with money, but with moral gravity. The narration leans intimate. She carried her constituency like family, not following count, but following pain, the inequality she had seen up close. In Congress, she quickly gained a reputation, quick-tongued, sharp-researched, as allergic to hypocrisy as she was to silence. Reporters called her blunt. Colleagues called her fearless. Her supporters called her something else altogether, representative. The blue jacket became symbolic. It wasn't designer couture or political branding, it was armor for visibility. She wore it through rallies, press scrums, and late-night committee meetings. "Every woman who stands out in power gets called loud," she once quipped, "so I figured I might as well look loud too." That line trended instantly, clipped and shared by young activists who saw in her a reflection of themselves. Unapologetic, grounded, and human. Narration raises the emotional pitch. She'd faced systemic injustice long before walking into that hearing. Every courtroom glare, every condescending smirk from a man twice her age and half her empathy, had trained her for this. Her calm wasn't the absence of rage, it was rage refined into precision. Viewers feel her dual identity colliding in purpose, daughter of the South and daughter of the struggle. Her education taught her the language of law, her roots taught her the language of pain. Together they made her fluent in truth. The scene crescendos into her congressional rhythm, speeches that blend poetry and policy, dissecting numbers with the urgency of heartache. When she speaks about housing inequality, Her hands tremble not from nerves, but remembrance. When she addresses climate or healthcare, she doesn't invoke abstract data. She calls names: the nurse in Fort Worth, the farmer in East Texas, the student suffocating under loans. Cameras often pan to her expression mid-hearing, eyebrows slightly raised, lips drawn tight, a face that silently says, "I've seen worse and I've beaten it." Behind closed doors, her team keeps pace with her relentless energy. Laptops glow past midnight, coffee cooling by stacks of federal records. There's laughter mixed with fatigue, the holy noise of people daring to care. Into this nightly grind slipped the story that would define her next battle, the discovery buried deep in public filings, beneath layers of bureaucratic disguise, corporate tax provisions that looked suspiciously hand-tailored for giants like Musk's empire. She didn't stumble onto them, she hunted them. The pattern revealed itself like faint ink under ultraviolet light. Narration sharpens. This wasn't about catching a billionaire. This was about tracing the bloodstream of a nation's inequality right back to its source. She read every document twice, highlighting connections others dismissed as coincidence. For her, coincidence was just unexamined cause. Each new figure hardened her resolve. As the camera of imagination circles her congressional office, viewers glimpse the dual tension, exhaustion and invigoration intertwined. She slips the last document into a thick folder, adjusts the crease of her blue jacket, and looks up at the Capitol skyline glowing past midnight. Tomorrow, she thinks, they'll hear our side of the story. The narrator's voice swells with conviction. She didn't come to perform outrage. She came carrying proof, evidence drawn not from rumor, but from receipts. And in that stack of paper lay the difference between rhetoric and revelation. The montage closes on her reflection in the glass window, a calm face hiding volcanic certainty. The city outside buzzes, unaware that one voice is about to unsettle its most comfortable myths. Few knew that inside the thick folder she carried was evidence meticulously traced through public filings, lines of code hidden in policy, and once she spoke, silence would be short-lived. The hearing resumes like a battlefield dressed in bureaucracy. Polished nameplates gleam under fluorescent lights, microphones hum faintly, omnivorous, ready to devour every syllable. At the long table, Musk's representatives sit impeccably framed, suits sharp enough to wound, smiles engineered in public relations labs. They've done this before. They think they'll do it again. Then Jasmine Crockett leans forward. Her voice, measured but piercing, slices through the verbal fog that precedes her. "Let's start with clarity," she says. "You've spoken about innovation, about making America competitive. I simply need to know how that innovation required $10 billion in tax breaks." The first witness smiles a politician's smile, though he isn't one. "Congresswoman, innovation of this scale is risky. We create jobs, we expand manufacturing, we..." She interrupts without raising her volume. "You expand," light pause, "with public money." A wave of murmurs rolls through the spectator seats. The cameras adjust focus, the red lights blinking like sirens. Across social media feeds, live commentators type furiously, timestamps already branded for the highlight reel. Musk himself sits composed behind his team, expression blank, a still photograph amid motion. But there's a flicker, somewhere between irritation and disbelief, that the narrative could slip beyond his control. One of his advisors clears his throat into the microphone. "Congresswoman, government partnerships are standard practice. Economic stimulus." She interjects again, polite but lethal, "Stimulus stops when everyone else is breathless from paying the bill." The narrator's voice overlays the quiet chaos. What began as testimony has become theater, the kind that spills from policy briefings into history books. The air feels charged, like metal before a storm strike. She flips a page in her folder, eyes scanning figures she knows by heart. "According to your filings, your company received direct subsidies from at least 6 states and federal grants through 3 agencies. Each agreement projected thousands of jobs that never materialized. Can you explain the discrepancy?" "Those projections evolve over time," the representative stammers. "Evolve," she repeats, almost whispering. "Evolution usually implies improvement." Laughter ripples through the back rows, a quick, electric relief from the tension, but her face remains still, professional, unsmiling. She isn't here for applause. Cut to the reporters lined along the wall, fingers clattering over keyboards. One mouths to another, she's doing math on the record. The witness leans toward his mic again. "Congresswoman, these programs are legally compliant." "So was segregation once," she fires back, tone calm as rain on glass. The room freezes. A few heads jerk upward, a cameraman exhales audibly. The narrator punctuates, "No yelling, no theatrics, just a scalpel guided by principle." She turns a page, speaks again with surgical composure. So help me understand how public money became your private runway. Because when our constituents drive to work on potholes while your clients fly to orbit, something about that equation reads off. Silence. Even the microphones seem to hesitate before transmitting. The representative glances nervously toward Musk for rescue, but none comes. Instead, the billionaire's jaw tightens, his hands clasped together. Control, his favorite word, has fled the room. Crockett presses on, her cadence now a metronome of accountability. You mentioned competitiveness, she says. I want to know who's competing. Because the mom in Houston working 2 jobs? She's not in this race. The teacher buying crayons out of pocket? Not in it either. So if this is a competition, it's one America keeps losing. Camera flashes burst like lightning. Somewhere, a news producer whispers, that's the clip. She pauses long enough for sincerity to harden into discomfort. Then, drawing a breath sharper than a gavel strike, she lowers her tone. I don't begrudge success, Mr. Musk. But I do question a success story written on the Publics tab. And if you truly believe in the free market, maybe you can start by freeing Americans from paying for your marketing. Gasps. Aide whispering. Someone coughs to break tension, it fails. The spotlight of scrutiny burns brighter than any rocket exhaust. Narration weaves through the moment, heartbeat steady. In that room power shifted, imperceptibly at first but completely. The myth of invincibility collided with documentation and decency. And for the first time, the empire blinked. Crockett stacks her papers, the subtlest punctuation mark to her performance. She could end here, everyone expects her to. But she doesn't close the folder yet. She sits still, letting the silence twist tighter, every viewer leaning forward hungry. And then, just when the world thought she'd finish, Crockett saved the most devastating line for last. For a moment, no one breathes. The microphones hum in rhythmic suspense, cables buzz faintly beneath the desks like snakes waiting for movement. Jasmine Crockett glances down at her folder, a thick, dog-eared container of proofs, and begins unlocking the truth, one document at a time. Let's go through this slowly, she says. Her tone lands somewhere between schoolteacher and surgeon. Calm, exacting, merciless. Paper rustles. Each page she lifts feels heavier than the one before. You've explained your partnerships, she continues, so let's review what partnership really looked like. She turns over the first sheet. Texas. $2 billion in state abatements, land purchased for $1. Promise, 5,000 permanent jobs. Delivery, study shows a fraction of that. Then Nevada, more breaks, same promise. New York, California, each with their own flavor of generosity wrapped in public rhetoric. All totaled. She glances up, her voice sharpening. 10 billion. And counting. The phrase "and counting" sits on the microphone like dynamite still ticking. A reporter scribbles furiously. Someone in the back mutters, she's naming the numbers. A single camera flash ignites, then another. The repetition creates a strobe of accountability. Narration floats above, heartbeat steady, receipts can't shout, plead, or vote. But in the right hands, they testify louder than any witness. Crockett sets the page down, flat, deliberate. The thud echoes through the microphone, reverberating down the walls. Viewers at home will replay this 1,000 times, convinced they saw truth itself hit the desk. A Musk representative leans forward. Congresswoman, the data you cite lacks context. These are multi-year investments. She lifts one eyebrow. Context? You mean like the context of a single mother's tax return? She holds up another page. Because this, sir, is the federal report showing tax credits for working families expiring in the same fiscal period your company secured its biggest extension. So forgive me if my context sounds inconvenient. The aide beside him gulps audibly, eyes darting toward escape routes that don't exist. The narration intensifies, every decimal becomes a confession. Every pause carries the weight of 10,000 paychecks. Crockett flips to a new tab, edges crisp under fluorescent glare. Let's talk federal contracts, she says. Transportation, defense, exploration, you've got your fingerprints everywhere. Some of these contracts overlap with projects already subsidized by state money, meaning profit streams double dip from public accounts. Correct. We follow all federal guidelines, the witness stammers. I didn't ask about guidelines, she replies, voice steady as a slow drumbeat. I asked if you profited twice, once at the state level, once at the federal. Which means your innovation pipeline looks less like a business plan and more like a vacuum for our national budget. Gasps sweep through the rows of journalists. This is the sound of a story detonating live. Narration crawls in, the cameras zoom closer. The myth of the pioneer collapses under the weight of arithmetic. Crockett leans back briefly, hands clasped. Her expression isn't smug, it's solemn, like someone presiding over a necessary surgery. While teachers bought supplies out of pocket, she says softly, your empire cashed what they paid in taxes. The words hit with seismic precision. Somewhere in the back, a staffer whispers toward a colleague, she really said it. The representative's composure cracks. Congresswoman, you don't understand the scale of the industries we support. We employ tens of thousands. Yes, she interrupts, you employ them with wages partially subsidized by the very people you underpay. Congratulations on discovering the perpetual motion machine of inequality. The room tilts into silence again. Narration sharpens to poetry. It isn't volume that wins a hearing, it's truth delivered without tremor. Her voice slides across marble floors, climbing the stairs of history one syllable at a time. Suddenly, cut to montage, social media exploding. Screens flicker across the narrative field. Hashtags bloom like fireworks. Hashtag receipts on the table. Hashtag 10 billion truth. Hashtag people over profit. Influencers cut clips, overlaying slow motion as the papers drop. Celebrities tweet, finally, someone said it. News anchors rehearse their feverish openings. The algorithm has found its heroine. Back in the chamber, reality continues unfolding in real time. The chairman coughs lightly, trying to regain procedural order. Congresswoman, please confine your remarks to the facts. She finishes unmoved. That's exactly what I'm doing. The spectators titter. The chairman looks defeated. Decorum has already surrendered to disclosure. Her eyes sweep the room one last time, over staffers clutching pens as if they might deflect blame, over reporters whose faces are lit by the glow of viral history, and finally to Musk himself. His smirk, that old badge of invulnerability, has vanished. What remains is calculation, how to rebuild myth after exposure. She slides the remaining papers toward the center of the desk, lining them like dominoes. What we have here, she says, voice softer but colder, is not innovation. It's institutionalized privilege wearing a hero's mask. You called it partnership. Where I'm from, we call it a hustle. Narration rises with orchestral weight. The phrase doesn't shout, it sings echoing down the halls, leaking into every corridor where deals are made in shadows. The aide beside Musk drops his pen. The sound is tiny, almost sympathetic. Crockett lifts her final document, one the audience hasn't seen before, marked with yellow tabs and handwritten notes. And this, she says, summarizes what the American taxpayer received in return. She reads, promises of 10,000 jobs. Delivery, less than half. Promises of educational partnerships. Delivery, under-delivered or delayed. Promises of environmental sustainability. Delivery, pending investigation. The only consistent performance here appears to be collecting benefits. The pause stretches. Even the HVAC hum seems to fade. And there it was, the narration whispers, the sound of illusions unspooling, the symphony of silence following revelation. Crockett closes the folder. The room exhales, collectively unsure whether to clap, curse, or pray. She doesn't look triumphant, she looks resolute. I want progress as much as any American, she says finally. But progress built on debt to the people isn't progress, it's plunder. Her words linger in the air like fate refused. Narration paints the closing imagery. For all his satellites and rockets, the richest man in the room had no orbit safe from arithmetic, no altitude high enough to escape accountability. Every empire has gravity, and she just reminded the room what keeps feet on the ground. Camera flashes burst again. Somewhere, a voice whispers half awed, half terrified, history just changed hashtags. Crockett gathers her papers, slow, deliberate, each sheet now wholly text. As she stands, the audience instinctively rises too, even disbelief feels like respect. The narrator seals the moment, tone both reverent and prophetic. In that instant, power remembered its reflection. The billionaire myth met the public ledger, and for a heartbeat, truth stood taller than wealth. As echoes of her words rippled across networks, no one could predict the tidal wave about to crash beyond Capitol Hill. The hearing ends, but its echoes refuse to fade. Within minutes, the footage fractures into 1,000 clips, tiny digital sparks streaking across timelines, each carrying her words like scripture. The nation hums with the sound of typing. Headlines explode before the committee chairs even scrape the floor. Crockett drops receipts on Musk, 10 billion reasons to listen. Congresswoman schools the world's richest man newsrooms race to splice her final line into montages of reaction, spinning graphics, urgent tones. If democracy had a trending algorithm, it just found its center. The narration swells with pulse and wonder, In a single afternoon, cold numbers translated into living outrage. Policy became poetry, accounting became ammunition. A teacher in Baltimore records herself watching the clip, eyes misting as she whispers, "She said what we've been living." Her students cheer when the paper lands on the desk in that now iconic slow-motion shot. A veteran in Michigan posts a video, "That's the backbone I fought for." Factory workers on break scroll the feed, nodding in confirmation. Each like, each comment, tightens the invisible thread between strangers who suddenly feel seen. But digital unity is never simple. Musk's loyalists rally instantly, tweets hurl statistics, memes mock her tone, influencers claim she doesn't understand innovation. Their fury only amplifies her visibility. Cable panels erupt into verbal firefights. Conservative commentators decry villainizing entrepreneurs, while progressive hosts replay her composure in reverent slow motion, dissecting every syllable like a coach studying a perfect playoff move. On TikTok, creators remix the hearing footage with cinematic music. On Reddit, analysts unpack the data she cited, linking PDFs, verifying her math live. Hashtag receipts on the table becomes a digital bonfire, lighting feeds around the world. By evening, even daytime talk shows slip her quote into monologues. The blue jacket becomes an instant symbol, avatars, profile photos, streetwear hastily embroidered by local entrepreneurs who smell both history and market demand. Narration dips low, tender, outrage blended with pride, pain fused with relief. For a moment, America remembered that indignation could sound like hope. Journalists gather outside the Capitol, microphones competing for airspace. When Crockett finally emerges, she doesn't bask. She just smiles faintly and says, "I read what was already public." The restraint fuels the fire more than a speech ever could. Cut to think tank analysts gathering on live streams. One explains in grave cadence, what she highlighted is the architecture of corporate welfare, legal, systemic, and largely invisible. Charts fill screens, economists cite decades of trickle-down mythology. Opposite them, lobbyists attempt counterspin. These incentives protect national innovation. Only to face data laid out by viewers in comment threads faster than any anchor could read. Narration grows more lyrical, a digital courtroom forms overnight, the jury millions strong. Tweets become affidavits of lived experience, teachers, single parents, veterans testifying with hashtags instead of signatures. Meanwhile, on the West Coast, tech executives clutch PR statements drafted too late. Boardrooms flicker with crisis management slides, phrases like rebuilding trust and reframing narrative. The irony drips heavier than the rain outside. Back online, her defenders double down. Not politicians, not pundits, just regular people. A grocery cashier writes, "Maybe my taxes are innovation fuel, but I'd like a seat on the rocket." Thousands retweet. Civic groups plan forums titled "The Real Cost of Innovation." College debate teams analyze her rhetorical precision, noting how she built outrage through facts, not fury. Narration intertwines emotion and motion. This is how movements start, not with chance, but with a quiet recalibration of truth. The following morning, newspaper editorials stretch from admiration to admonition. Some anoint her the conscience of Congress, others warn of populism. Yet beneath every contrasting opinion lies consensus: she made people pay attention. Television anchors replay one 60-second segment again and again, the part where she connects corporate subsidy to human sacrifice. The pause afterward becomes its own phenomenon, a meme labeled the 4-second silence that shook Wall Street. Ratings skyrocket. Then, the quieter montage, the human one. A janitor pauses sweeping to replay the clip on a cracked phone. A grandmother in El Paso tells her granddaughter, "That's how truth sounds, Mija." In classrooms, civics teachers stream the hearing, leading discussions about accountability. The clip crosses language barriers, subtitles march across screens from Manila to Nairobi. For once, the export isn't entertainment, it's integrity. Narration breathes with awe, empires measure success in dollars. Movements measure it in resonance. Even skeptical commentators admit her unflappable composure turns statistics into story. She didn't shout, one rival congressman concedes on camera. She reasoned. That's more dangerous than shouting. For the first time in years, the algorithm rewards integrity with virality. As the sun sets, projections of her image blaze across downtown buildings. Grassroots organizers turn architecture into billboards. The blue jacket becomes a symbol not of party, but principle. Underneath its folded fabric, millions sense the pulse of possibility. Narrator's tone softens into philosophy. Every generation waits for someone to remind them that power can blush. Yesterday, power did. Yet amid the tidal wave of applause and analysis, another current moves quieter, deeper. Inside her office that night, Jasmine stares at the city lights flickering like restless pixels. Notifications keep exploding on her phone: praise, invitations, requests to run for higher office. She scrolls once and puts it face down. Her reflection in the window looks both proud and haunted. Because every truth-teller learns quickly, the moment the crowd cheers, the clock starts ticking toward the next reckoning. Narration fades almost to whisper: America's appetite is endless. Today they celebrate her courage. Tomorrow they will test its endurance. The sound design of imagination narrows to one heartbeat, slow and steady. The digital world hums, divided yet alive. Supporters chant her name online, detractors sharpen talking points, and somewhere, billion-dollar boardrooms whisper strategies for damage control. But beneath the applause, a bigger question planted itself in America's conscience, one she herself has no escape from. The marble corridors of the Capitol have never felt this quiet. The hearing room is empty now, just paper ghosts left behind, scribbled notes, drained water bottles, the faint perfume of adrenaline. Jasmine Crockett steps into the hallway, shoulders relaxing for the first time all day. Her phone lights up like a live wire, notifications spilling across the screen, each one a digital pulse of gratitude, fury, disbelief. She doesn't scroll. She just watches the glow, that tiny rectangle holding a reflection of something larger, a country wrestling with itself. An aide jogs up beside her, wide-eyed and grinning. "Ma'am, it's everywhere," he says. News, Twitter, TikTok, even my mom's church group posted the clip. She laughs softly, the sound edged with fatigue. "Good," she murmurs. "Then maybe people will start reading budgets like scripture." They step into the fading afternoon light. The bronze doors close behind them with a heavy sigh, the kind that feels like history exhaling. Cameras wait at a distance, lenses tracking her every move, but she keeps her pace measured. There's no podium now, no script, just the long walk to the parking lot and the realization that truth doesn't end when the microphone cuts. Narration slows, reverent. In every age, democracy depends on someone willing to trade comfort for candor. A voice within her, a quieter one, asks whether it was worth the fight. Whether challenging a titan risks making enemies too powerful to name again. She answers herself with a memory, the client she once defended for stealing diapers, trembling before a judge. The same economy that humiliated that woman had just been exposed in congressional daylight. She smiles at the symmetry. Accountability is the highest form of patriotism, the narration continues. It demands that the nation love itself enough to confront its reflection. Across the city, headlines loop on television screens. Analysts debate, but regular people feel the quiet swell of vindication. A janitor pauses, sweeping to nod at her televised image. Finally, he whispers. A teacher re-watches the clip before class, determined to explain integrity not as theory but as living proof. Small, invisible moments that cost nothing but mean everything. Crockett reaches her car, stops for one last look at the vast marble steps. She can almost hear the arguments trapped inside their stone walls, the ghostly remnants of power justifying itself. Power without principle, she thinks, is architecture without foundation. It stands impressive, until it cracks. Her aide opens the door, but she lingers. The evening wind threads through her hair, replacing the sterile air of government rooms with something raw, almost sacred. She whispers, not for cameras, not for applause, but for herself, standing up cost me comfort. Staying silent would have cost the country its conscience. The narration folds around her words like an anthem. History doesn't record who kept quiet. It remembers who refused. In the following montage the story widens, citizens meeting at town halls, students debating subsidy policy in classrooms, grassroots groups organizing around transparency. The spark she struck has found oxygen. The narrator's tone warms, almost hopeful. In a time addicted to cynicism, one act of unflinching truth can reset a nation's pulse. Crockett finally slides into the car. The window reflection captures her aide scrolling through tweets, each one a chorus: hero, patriot, troublemaker. Finally someone said it. She chuckles and shakes her head. "Let them call me what they need to," she says. "I know what I'm called to do." The car pulls away from the Capitol, headlights spilling gold across wet pavement. The city glimmers, half storm, half sunrise, uncertain whether it's waking up or winding down. But somewhere inside its sleepless heart, something fundamental has shifted. Power has been reminded of its price. Narration closes on the note of renewal. Truth doesn't topple empires overnight. It simply refuses to kneel. And tonight, for the first time in a long time, America remembered how to stand tall again. She didn't just fact-check a billionaire. She reminded a nation of its worth. Screens flicker with the afterglow of her words, clips playing on loop, emojis streaming in vertical constellations. The comments blend hope and fire, disbelief and resolve. Against this digital chorus, the narrator's voice steadies into calm conviction. This wasn't just a hearing, it was a mirror held up to power. Slow-motion montages ripple across the screen, classroom projectors replaying the speech, a barbershop tangle of debate and pride, a grandmother smiling through tears as she adjusts the volume. Civic emotion pulses like electricity. One voice armed with truth can still bend the arc of a nation, the narration continues. One confrontation can prove that decency is not obsolete, that principle is not nostalgia. It is the heartbeat we nearly forgot we had. Visual overlays show trending hashtags transforming into real-world images. Marches, town halls, volunteers registering voters. The message travels from comment sections to community centers, from DC Marble to school gymnasium floors. You watched her stand, the narrator says, tone warming into invitation. Now remember, democracy isn't a movie you stream. It's a story you continue. A final montage, the blue jacket hung on a chair, sunlight spilling across those once wrinkled folders, the city's skyline glowing like a circuit newly closed. The music swells with restrained optimism, turning outrage into purpose. Share this story, the narrator urges softly. Argue, question, vote, show up. Because truth means nothing if it stays whispered. The frame fades to black, but the words linger, white against silence. Because the next confrontation won't need billionaires or hearings, just people who refuse to stay silent.